In early 2025, something unusual began to stir among Johnny Depp's fans. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a quiet feeling that something had changed. His recent public appearances looked different. The same warm smile was there, but behind it, there was a hint of exhaustion that even the cameras couldn't hide. Fans began asking subtle questions online. Is he okay? Why does he look more fragile lately? But no one dared to speak loudly about it. After everything he had survived, courtroom battles, reputation wars, media storms, everyone hoped he was finally at peace. Yet whispers kept growing. Was Johnny Depp truly fine, or was there a hidden story unfolding behind the scenes? A story no headline dared to reveal. A story only his silence could tell. For years, the world watched Johnny Depp rise, fall, and rise again like a man carved out of pure resilience. He wasn't just an actor. He became a symbol of silent strength. When Hollywood turned its back on him, when the world judged him without hearing his side, when headlines painted him as a villain before the truth could breathe, Johnny didn't explode. He didn't break down publicly. He simply stood still and let time reveal the truth. And it did. His comeback wasn't loud, it was poetic. But in 2025, something shifted. Fans who have followed him for decades noticed it first. They don't just see Johnny the celebrity. They see Johnny, the man behind the legend. And in his latest appearances, his energy felt different. Not weak, but quieter. Not defeated, but tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. He still laughed with that same charming ease. He still greeted fans with genuine warmth. But there was a gentle slowness in his steps, a thoughtful pause in his words, like someone who had finally allowed himself to feel the weight he had carried for too long. Social media comments began to appear. He looks thinner. Is everything okay? There's something in his eyes, like he's trying to hide pain. He smiles, but his spirit looks quieter than before. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't drama. It was concern, the kind that comes from people who truly care. You see, most celebrities survive scandals. Johnny Depp endured one of the most brutal character assassinations in modern media history. His every expression became a meme. His private heartbreak was replayed millions of times across screens like entertainment. People forgot that behind the name Johnny Depp stood a human being, not a headline. He walked through that storm without screaming for sympathy. He didn't post emotional speeches online. He chose silence, dignity, and when the world finally realized the truth, they celebrated his strength. But strength has a cost, and that cost doesn't always show in a moment. It shows years later, quietly, when the cameras are no longer flashing. And in 2025, that's what began to worry his loyal fans. Not because he looked weak, but because, for the first time, Johnny Depp looked like a man who had given too much of himself to the world and was finally beginning to feel it. To understand what Johnny Depp is going through in 2025, you have to look back. Not at the fame, not at the red carpets, but at the hidden nights no camera ever captured. Because pain doesn't always show in the moment it's created. Sometimes it sleeps inside the body, waiting for quiet years to finally speak. For most of his career, Johnny Depp lived like a man sprinting through life on pure passion. He did his own stunts, spent sleepless nights perfecting scenes, played emotionally exhausting characters, and drowned himself in roles that demanded his heart, mind, and soul. Captain Jack Sparrow wasn't just an act. It was countless days under scorching sun, heavy costumes, and long hours of filming at sea. Those movies brought laughter to millions, but they also brought injuries, fatigue, and silent strain to the man behind the character. And then came the decade of headlines, when the world pointed fingers, where his name became a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. Johnny was forced into a fight he never asked for. Stress? That's a soft word for what he endured. He wasn't just battling accusations. He was battling public judgment, betrayal, and a media machine that fed on his pain for views. Doctors say emotional trauma affects the body like a slow poison. It doesn't hit you all at once. It wears you down quietly. Your sleep changes, your heartbeat changes, your breathing changes. You smile, but your nervous system remembers every insult. You laugh, but your body stores every humiliation. Johnny Depp is a man who absorbed years of chaos in silence. While most people would have crumbled, he kept working. He toured with his band. He attended court hearings in the morning and walked into concerts at night. Still smiling, still shaking hands, still pretending nothing hurt. Because that's what strong people do until their body decides it has had enough. And now, in 2025, that's what fans are quietly noticing. The court battles are over. The world has finally acknowledged his truth. But the aftershocks are catching up. Peace doesn't always heal immediately. Sometimes, healing itself feels like exhaustion. The public saw the warrior. Now, they are seeing the tired hero, still standing, still gracious, but a little slower, and perhaps, for the first time, allowing himself to be human. Johnny Depp never announced anything. There was no public statement, no dramatic headline, no official medical confirmation. But sometimes, silence tells more truth than any press conference ever could. In early 2025, a few observant fans began noticing changes, not loud changes, quiet ones, the kind only people who have watched him for years could detect. On stage, he still smiled. He still greeted fans with warmth and kindness. But there were new pauses between his steps, like someone who had started measuring how much energy every movement would cost. He used to walk with that free, unbothered confidence, like a man floating through life with no weight on his shoulders. Now his steps were careful, deliberate, almost like someone protecting something unseen. Not fear, not weakness, just awareness. His voice had always carried a certain magic. Soft, deep, calm, like it could turn even simple words into poetry. But lately, fans noticed he spoke slower. Each word seemed to come after a tiny hesitation, as if he was giving his body time to keep up with his thoughts. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't alarming. It was just different, and people noticed. He still sounds like Johnny, but there's a little fatigue in his tone. Why does he take a moment before speaking, like he's catching his breath? He smiles, but it feels like he's saving energy. Some dismissed it. Others said he was just getting older. But those who understood trauma knew better. The body doesn't age in numbers. It ages in emotions. And Johnny Depp had lived through more emotional aging than most people experience in a lifetime. In photographs, his eyes still carried that familiar spark. But behind that spark, there was a softness, a rare vulnerability. The kind of look people have when they survive something huge and are finally allowing themselves to rest. He no longer tried to fill every silence with charm. He allowed silence to exist around him. That was the biggest sign. For decades he entertained, performed, gave pieces of his soul in every interaction. But now, he stood still sometimes, simply breathing, just being, as if finally learning that he didn't know the world energy all the time. Even his music changed. Those close to him say that during rehearsals, he spent more time listening than playing. He'd close his eyes, not perform, but to feel, not to impress, but to be present. His guitar wasn't an instrument anymore. It had become a form of healing, a quiet heartbeat in the background of his recovery. He appeared on stage less frequently, not because he couldn't, but because he finally chose not to push himself beyond what his spirit could handle. This was new. Johnny Depp, the man who once showed up everywhere, was now embracing absence as a form of strength. True fans didn't complain. They respected it. They saw that every appearance he made wasn't for fame. It was a gift, a moment he chose to share, not a duty he was forced into. And maybe that's why people grew even more protective of him. The world had taken so much from this man. His peace, his privacy, his voice. And still, he stood tall. Still kind, still humble, still soft-spoken. But this time, in 2025, fans didn't just admire Johnny Depp the legend. They worried about Johnny Depp the human, not because he appeared weak, but because for the first time, he allowed the world to see that strength also looks like slowing down. Silence can be many things. For some, it is fear. For others, it is power. Johnny Depp has always been a man of few words when it comes to his personal life. While many celebrities rush to social media to explain themselves, defend their reputation, or clear their name, Johnny chose the opposite path. He let people talk. He let headlines scream. He let the internet laugh, judge, assume, and speculate. And through all of it, he remained quiet. Not because he was weak, not because he didn't care, but because he understood something most people never do. The truth does not need noise. It only needs time. In 2025, as rumors about his health quietly began to rise, fans expected some kind of announcement, a reassurance, a public explanation. Just a simple, "I'm fine." But it never came. Instead, he stayed still, just like he did in the darkest days of his public trial. No dramatic posts, no emotional interviews, just silence. And that silence meant everything. To understand Johnny Depp's silence, you have to understand the way he loves his supporters. He has always thanked his fans with genuine warmth, calling them his warriors, his family, the people who stood beside him when the world turned away. He calls them the only real reason I survived this. But love, real love, isn't always loud. Sometimes, love is choosing not to make the people who care about you carry your pain. And that's what Johnny did. He stayed silent, not to hide weakness, but to protect the people who worry about him. To him, speaking about health or struggle might feel like asking for pity. And Johnny Depp is not a man who ever wanted pity from anyone. He has always endured with quiet dignity, even if it meant the world never saw the weight he carried. Maybe that's why fans respect him, not just as an artist, but as a human being. He could have used the media for sympathy. He could have made emotional statements to win hearts. But he didn't, because real strength isn't proven by how loud you fight, but by how gracefully you stand. Those close to him say he often chooses music and solitude over public appearances now, that he sits with his guitar more than he sits in front of interviews, that he speaks through melodies instead of microphones. Some might see that as isolation, but fans who understand him know what it really is. A man who has been loud for the world his entire life, finally choosing to be quiet for himself. And maybe that's the most powerful message in this untold story. Johnny Depp is not disappearing. He is healing in silence. Not every battle needs an audience. Not every pain needs a statement. Sometimes, just choosing to keep breathing quietly is an act of strength. And so, as the world keeps watching, guessing, worrying, and hoping, he continues to do what he has always done, carry his pain with grace. There's a strange thing about strong people. The world claps for their victories, but rarely sees the wounds hidden under their armor. Johnny Depp became a symbol of resilience, a man who stood tall when millions watched to see if he would break. But what most people don't realize is this. Strong people don't break in public. They break in silence, when no one is looking. For years, Johnny carried his battles quietly. When the world turned into a courtroom, when headlines mocked his pain, when strangers dissected his life like entertainment, he never lashed out. He didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't plead. He walked through fire with calm eyes. But calm is not the same as unhurt. Those who truly understand trauma know this. Recovery doesn't begin when the storm hits. It begins after the storm, when the world goes quiet and you are left alone with your heartbeat. And that's what happened to Johnny Depp. When the noise faded, when the cameras moved on to the next scandal, when the internet found someone else to criticize, he was left in the silence of what it truly meant to survive. He won the public battle, but there was a private one that no one saw. The emotional toll wasn't loud. It didn't look like tears or dramatic breakdowns. It looked like slow mornings, heavy breathing, and a body that suddenly felt older than its age. It looked like someone pausing before answering simple questions, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he had spent years measuring every word. He had been watched, recorded, judged, analyzed. Even his sighs were turned into viral clips. Imagine living like that, every instinct controlled, every reaction held back. That kind of control doesn't just affect the mind, it affects the body. Doctors call it nervous system fatigue. Artists call it soul weariness. But in simple human words, it is the cost of fighting alone. When you carry everything without asking for help, your body becomes a place where unspoken pain goes to live. Those around him noticed moments others missed. Moments when his shoulders would drop just a little too low after a conversation. Moments when he would close his eyes longer than necessary, just to stay in that moment of stillness. Moments when he looked peaceful, but also like someone who had felt too much, too deeply, for too long. He rarely complained. He never presented himself as a victim. But healing is not always graceful. Sometimes healing looks like a man learning to breathe again after forgetting what peace feels like. Fans often say, Johnny Depp saved our childhood with his characters. But now, it is time for people to understand something else. Behind those characters stood a man who sacrificed parts of himself to bring them to life. And in 2025, that man is not broken. He is just finally allowing himself to feel everything he once pushed aside to keep standing. And that is not weakness. That is healing. After years of running through chaos, something changed in Johnny Depp's life. Not with a loud announcement, not with a dramatic headline, but with a quiet shift in the way he chose to live. For the first time in a long time, Johnny stopped rushing. The man who once lived between film sets, courtrooms, airports, interviews, and red carpets began choosing small, peaceful moments over the rush of celebrity life. He no longer chased time. He started walking alongside it. Those close to him say he began waking up earlier, not for schedules, but just to watch the world in silence. Mornings that were once filled with calls, meetings, and pressure were replaced with quiet coffee, slow breathing, and the sound of music playing softly in the background. Not music for performance. Music for healing. He didn't quit life. He simply changed his pace. People noticed that he started stepping away from large productions and leaned more into personal projects. Art, painting, music sessions with close friends, small gatherings, private concerts where he played not for applause, but for connection. He became more selective with his energy, only appearing in places where he felt safe, only staying in rooms where his soul felt seen. That's a form of self-preservation most people never reach. The courage to say, I don't need to be everywhere. I just need to be where I feel real. His team confirms he now limits his travel, takes longer breaks, and prioritizes his mental and physical rest over public appearances. For someone who spent years giving all of himself to the world, this shift wasn't just a lifestyle change. It was an act of quiet rebellion, a rebellion against exhaustion, a rebellion against expectation, a rebellion against becoming a product instead of a person. He began valuing small, human things. Laughter shared in a room without cameras, music played without an audience, conversations that didn't need to be recorded, moments that never make headlines, but heal the soul more than fame ever could. He walks slower now, but not because he is weak. He walks slower because he is no longer running from anything. His health journey is not just physical. It is emotional, spiritual, deeply personal. He has learned that healing is not loud. Healing is gentle. Healing is choosing softness after living through hardness. And fans see it. They no longer just admire him for his roles. They admire him for his humanity, for being a man who survived chaos, not by becoming harder, but by becoming softer with himself. This new phase of his life isn't about stepping away from the world. It's about meeting the world differently, with clarity, calm, and a quiet kind of strength that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. He doesn't need the world to understand. He just needs peace. And for the first time, he is choosing it. Not every story is meant to entertain. Some stories are meant to wake something up inside us. Johnny Depp's journey is one of those stories. Because behind the fame, behind the court battles, behind the tabloid headlines, there's a human lesson that speaks to millions of silent hearts watching him from around the world. A lesson about pain, healing, dignity, and the quiet art of coming back to life after being broken. Johnny Depp taught something powerful, not by words, but by how he lived. You don't have to announce your pain to be strong. You don't have to be loud to rise again. And you don't need the world's permission to heal. Fans who once cheered for his roles are now learning from his silence. They are realizing that strength is not always fire and fight. Sometimes, strength is softness, rest, and choosing peace even when you have every reason to be angry at the world. In a time where everything is shared, posted, and performed, Johnny did something rare. He healed in private. And that teaches us something deeply human. You don't have to explain your struggle to everyone. You don't have to keep performing strength just to make people comfortable. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to slow down. Healing is not laziness. Protecting your peace is not selfish. His journey reminds fans that survival is not about fighting nonstop. Survival is also about knowing when to put the sword down. Many people watching this video right now might be going through their own silent battles, stress, burnout, heartbreak, pressure to keep going like nothing is wrong. They wake up tired. They show up smiling. They keep it together because they don't want to worry others. This section is for them. To those who carry silent battles, Johnny's story whispers a reminder. You're allowed to pause. You're allowed to heal slowly. You don't always have to be the strong one. Life will try to convince you that your worth depends on your performance. But watching Johnny Depp choose stillness after surviving a lifetime of noise teaches us something pure. Your value is not in how much you fight, but in how gently you learn to live after the fight is over. Fans don't just admire him for surviving. They admire him for choosing peace after survival. In a world that expects people to move on, Johnny shows that real healing is not moving on. It is moving forward with more softness, more wisdom, and more gratitude for every quiet moment. And maybe that is what we all need to learn. To be okay with doing less, with speaking less, with choosing peace over noise, and with protecting our hearts instead of constantly proving our strength. Johnny Depp's Untold story isn't just about health. It's about humanity. It's about grace after chaos. It's about finding peace, even when the world once tried to take everything from you. He is not just a Hollywood icon, not just Captain Jack or the face of 1,000 characters. Behind the fame, behind the battles, behind the headlines, there is simply a man named Johnny who loved, who hurt, who fought, and who finally chose peace over noise. In 2025, his story is no longer about victory or defeat. It is about freedom. Freedom to live slowly. Freedom to heal quietly. Freedom to be human again. And maybe, just maybe, that is the greatest lesson he could ever give the world. Because legends are remembered for their glory, but humans are remembered for their grace. And Johnny Depp, after everything, is finally allowed to be both.